Hello, you're watching the Telco as a Platform Summit, part of our year-round DSP Leaders coverage. I'm Guy Daniels, and today's discussion looks at applying platform economics to telco services. Should telcos become platform businesses? And if so, how can they leverage their data platforms to create value? What are the benefits? And just as important, what are the risks? Well, let's find out, and I'm delighted to say that joining me on the programme are Colin Bannon, who is Chief Technology Officer at BT Business, Vivek Murthy, who is President OSS Business Unit at Rakuten Symphony, Fahim Sabir, who is Director of Digital Solutions at Colt Technology Services, and Warren Bayek, who is Vice President Technology Office at Wind River. Hello everyone, it's good to see you all. Thank you for joining us on the show. Lots to talk about today, as always. So let's start. And let me ask you, should telcos build a digital platform as its core product and then provide access to this to its partners, developers and users to collaborate and create value within the overall ecosystem? What are the benefits of this approach? I'm going to ask all of you this, but Warren, I'm going to start and come to you if I can.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. I'd say for years we've been talking about this shift in the telco industry. And while I think it's important to always remember, telco's core business is and probably always will be providing high availability, very reliable services and connectivity. Providing a digital platform as the future is something telcos really have to do if they're going to take part in the new digital economy. You know, the traditional services are becoming increasingly commoditized, obviously. So as telcos look for ways to remain on the cutting edge and to partake in what is sure to be the next wave of digitized services and the digitized economy, they have to create a platform. They have to create a platform as a service for their commodity, to get out of this commodity business. Telcos have built an incredibly useful and set of powerful assets now with 5G and the next G coming, right? This low latency, high bandwidth edge capabilities and edge computing, the potential use cases are, beyond a lot of smart people on this panel, a lot of smart people listening. What they could do with this ecosystem is even beyond the imagination of all of us, right? Think of what Apple did with the App Store and Amazon with AWS. The telcos have a similar capability going forward to use these digital assets at the edge to create that sort of an ecosystem. So while their core business may always remain connectivity, building a core business of a digital platform is critical to their connectivity and their economic future going forward.
Thanks very much, Warren. That's quite an opportunity at stake here then. Fahim, let's come across to you. Do you see this platform-based approach as being essential for telcos?
Yeah, I mean, I think Warren covered a lot of it. I mean, it's an incredible paradox, isn't it? I mean, telcos are the enablers of many, many digital platforms in ourselves. The cloud doesn't work without us. In fact, nothing really works without us. We provide that backbone of connectivity. So it's taken us a long time to get to where we are getting to. But I mean, I think the question isn't about should they. I think the question is what would happen if we didn't. And I just don't think that we will have a role to play unless we actually start exposing what we do as digital platforms. And just to echo Warren's point, it's beyond the imagination, the art of the possible. I can imagine when AWS was being put together, they didn't expect, that it would be used for a service like Netflix or something like that. And right now, we have a set of assets, as Warren said, there's a lot of power that can be unlocked from those assets. And, I think that basically we are not providing the tools at the moment for customers, developers, enterprises and other carriers to be able to do that.
Thanks, Fahim. And like you said, honing in on specific future use cases is always difficult, if not impossible. But you've got to get the tools and the foundations in place to facilitate that. Vivek, let's come across and get your views on this. This whole platform approach for telcos, does it indeed have its benefits?
Yeah, and You say, I work for Rakuten Symphony and our sister company, Rakuten Mobile. If you look at the genesis of that group, it's a real live example of what we're trying to talk about here, which is, the Rakuten Group started with a whole bunch of services, such as e-commerce and, fintech and banking and travel. And then they moved into mobile. And so it was a case of a company moving from a techco to a telco. And, the benefits are there for us to see, because they managed to create this ecosystem initially, and then honed in on mobile, and managed to sell and upsell and cross-sell a whole bunch of services to this wider ecosystem. So the benefits are absolutely there to see, and I totally agree with what's been said so far, and it's a real example of what's happening with Rakuten. And I think if, obviously, because of being a greenfield, things have been a little, I suppose, less complex, but if we can somehow get to that situation of being a platform-led, ecosystem-led play, the benefits are absolutely there for us to harvest.
Great. Thanks very much, Vivek. And Colin, I'll come to you. Are you in agreement with what our other panelists and guests are saying today about the benefits of this platform approach?
Yeah, I think the question is as much about how deep you want to platformize rather than whether or not you put a platform front end on that. And I think that's a challenge that all telcos are wrestling with right now, is how deep do you go? I would love to have been in Vivek's shoes. He's an old colleague of mine, with a greenfield. It is incredibly challenging for telcos to digitalize and platformatize what was essentially very stovepiped different portfolio areas to get to this new future world, to serve their customers, to innovate, and to get really scale. And platformatization is to get to the scale and to get to the unit economics in this new world. You absolutely need it, and you need to change the way you serve your customers. Platformatizing is essential to change the way the agility of a telco, which traditionally has not been very agile. Any telco that tells you, traditional telco that tells you that there isn't somebody in the back area somewhere in their OSS or BSS running an Excel spreadsheet, they're probably lying to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Colin. Well, I'm going to stay with you, Colin, if I can, because I want to bring the conversation on to what sort of digital infrastructure is going to be required to facilitate these platform businesses. You already spoke about the need for scale there. You spoke about the challenges of brownfield operators. So what do you see as the infrastructure that's required?
Hey, well, look, I can only speak from ourselves. I'll pick one example. We're doing lots of transformation across BT, both in our consumer and our business area, in our volume and our value area, both in mobile and fixed. But I'll just use an example of fixed for a minute. What we call Global Fabric. We've been working on 3 years, going back as far deep into the network and reinventing what network is traditionally. And there's a number of things that we realized that we needed from a platform system. First of all, we made a very tough decision to rip the Band-Aid off. We were assisted with an end of service life challenge happening anyway, as to whether or not we wanted to reinvent the core infrastructure that sits behind the digital front end, and whether we want to make that fully programmable and digital from the very bottom level. Keep in mind that the network protocols of communications really hasn't been innovated. You just added layers of abstraction over the last 30 years, but the protocols generally have stayed the same, just additional layers of abstraction on top. And in order to fully reimagine the network, we took multiple cores in our network and eliminated them and converged them. So ELAN, E-line, Internet, MPLS, and some aspects of mobile and some aspects of our media core as well, collapse them into a single programmable core. Abstraction in the network becomes really important. We abstracted concepts like the port, which people plug into, and the protocol. And now we've developed the concept of software-defined everything. And I think that's one of the first principles that telcos need, is full programmability deep into the network, including into the traditional areas. Otherwise, you don't get that agility and programmability end to end. The second thing that I think you need is zero touch, full automation, which requires telcos getting on top of their inventory. Without really clean inventory, it's incredibly hard to fully automate end to end and get the right outcomes from that side. Full stack observability becomes really important as well. And also abstraction of how you control the network. In traditional networks today, BGP, MPLS, moving towards segment routing, the boxes in a network today compute the path at each box. So the control plane and the data plane is one. And that is the traditional way of doing it. But that makes the core of all of our networks very efficient at moving packets around, but very inefficient at being able to, they're just black boxes. And so abstracting the path computation layer is really important to, as a communication provider, to make it software defined. Then you can start to inject business intent into your core, and that allows you start to solve for things like sovereignty for data in motion, not just data at rest. So that programmability in the core and transparency of the core is really important. And let's not forget, finally, API first, designing products that are microservice based with brilliant API exposure, because ultimately you want, and I mentioned it before, you want scale. So telcos need to collaborate better than ever with each other, use their CapEx really efficiently, and act as one as a much larger scale so that customers' traffic becomes transparent across each of the infrastructure, where you may be in different regions, but still be able to deliver brilliant outcomes for your customers, as well as that digital front end that allows omni-channel experience. All of that transformation, I can't tell you how hard that is to do, especially if you're going into a brownfield environment, but it is vitally important to stay relevant for your customers in the future.
Thank you, Colin. Really good insights there. Thanks very much. And I'll pick up on that API comment later in our show. But I do want to hear from Warren and Vivek as well, from their perspectives on what they're seeing in the market. And Vivek, I'll come to you first. What do you see as the infrastructure that's required for a telco to really succeed at being a platform business?
Yeah, again, I'm going to speak from this greenfield environment that I've recently come into in the form of Rakuten, where I work. I chuckle at when Colin was talking about brownfield. Yes, it is incredibly different in the two environments. Today, where we are in Rakuten, I'll speak from that experience. A lot of the infrastructure is ground up, built as a software-centric play. So from the cloud right at the bottom to things like Open RAN, right? Obviously Rakuten mobile has been a pioneer in that. When you think about all these kind of infrastructure elements being so software centric, what you end up getting is a stack which is very, very software centric, right? And basically you can start to get a huge amount of opportunities in terms of what you do with software, such as making changes is a lot easier. You get the CI/CD pipeline, so you start to do a lot of automation, regression testing. You can do that to what is fundamentally a network function in the form of a software stack, and that brings a huge amount of benefit when you do that. And these are kind of very important, I suppose, elements of trying to make a digital play. You also kind of get out of a vendor lock-in because you start to disaggregate from an old appliance way of building networks to this kind of commodity hardware and putting intelligent software on top. So you start to unleash a whole ecosystem play here, because you can start to now use this software paradigm to build modular blocks and start to expose APIs. I know we'll come to that later. The second construct is, when you have this kind of software-centric infrastructure, you can start to collect a huge amount of data from all the infrastructure elements and bring it in one place. So with that kind of software stack and data coming in and the observability, like Colin mentioned, you can start to really look at driving your infrastructure towards services that you want to sell to our customers. And what I'm talking about here is, if you think about, again, ecosystem play, coming home, closer home to Rakuten, we have a single identity with which we map all the customers in terms of all the services they consume, whether in mobile, or connectivity, or indeed all the upper OTT services in the form of banking, finance, travel, etc. And that's the power of having this kind of software-centric play, is you can start to treat it as as a service that can be manipulated like a software. And that unleashes a huge amount of opportunity in terms of, again, what I said earlier, cross-selling, upselling, all kinds of services, bringing in partners indeed into this play. So yeah, just to summarize, having software-centric layers in the protocol, in the tech stack, having data collection and bringing the AI sort of capabilities on top of that data. All these are fundamental to building a digital infrastructure, and it's awesome to see that at play in Rakuten. And I know brownfields are also succeeding to a large extent, albeit, like Colin said, incredibly complex and hard, but I think they are getting there too.
Great. Thanks very much, Vivek. A lot of potential here. It's just incredible potential, really. But Warren, as you started by talking about this potential, what needs to be in place? What infrastructure do telcos need to have in place to realize this?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of expand on something Colin mentioned, talking about networking at the core and creating a software based architecture overall. I'm going to extend that all the way to the far edge as well. As the telcos have virtualized the far edge, and Vivek is well aware of this happening, Rakuten has had a big part of that, as has Wind River. We've created the ability to engage with these increasingly software-defined devices that live beyond the telco. And I'm going to bring up one specific example in the case of Wind River with our parent company, Aptiv, which is incredibly involved in the software-defined vehicle. So as more and more cars become really rolling data centers, right? I think we can start thinking of cars not as, a bunch of metal and wires. They really are becoming rolling data centers. The ability to, through software, define how these networks are being built such that workloads can be distributed correctly to software-defined vehicles in a way that makes sense for that industry to take off. For instance, some of the things that run in a software-defined vehicle are incredibly time-specific, and they need low latency and incredible reliability. And some don't, frankly, right? The safety systems, for instance, versus just something like your info entertainment systems. And the ability to create networking paradigms for each of those different workloads is something that we can do now in this virtual environment. And there's a monetization aspect that telcos can apply to that sort of network software capabilities. So, as Vivek said, by building this software layer top to bottom, I think the telcos have a unique opportunity to find interesting ways to monetize this through partnerships throughout the ecosystem. And, again, as we look at things like cars, there's a lot of use cases even beyond cars that will be software-defined devices beyond the telco edge that the telcos can find ways to monetize, that people are willing to pay for services that they can't get to today until this platform as an interface, as we expose these interfaces of the platforms to the telco ecosystem through their partnerships that they'll be able to engage in.
Great. Thanks for that perspective, Warren. And Fahim, let's come across to you. We've had a lot of views already and approaches to this, but, what does a telco need to put in place in terms of infrastructure? What are your thoughts?
So, I mean, there are two elements. So we haven't covered in too much detail. I think Warren was also mentioning it. The architecture of computer architecture at the edge is, in my opinion, really, really critical. I mean, ultimately, in the past, what we've had to do is any time that anybody has wanted anything that's sitting on their local site or close to their local site, it means deployment of more infrastructure. And the attitude towards that needs to change so that basically there's a lot more virtualization, a lot more sort of cloud native functions. So when somebody wants an appliance, then they can have that appliance on a virtualized basis. So I mean, this is something that we are looking at very closely at Colt. With sort of VCPE type services, firewalls and the such like. So what that means is, a customer can spin up a function very, very quickly and then start to use it rather than placing an order and then 3 weeks later a box turns up. The platform monetization really has to move into, and I love the way that Colin said it, software defined everything. So yeah, I mean that's really, really important. And the other thing that we haven't really spoken about, and that's maybe less of an infrastructure thing, but also people is one of the things that's really needed. The right people with the right attitudes that basically start from a blank sheet of paper. We can build a software defined everything stack, and let's go for it without being hampered by practices and thought processes of the past.
Yeah, thanks, Fahim. I'm so pleased you mentioned people. That's a really important component that we often overlook accidentally. But Fahim, I'd like to stay with you because we touched on APIs, and Vivek and Colin both mentioned APIs in earlier responses there. But how does this platform-based strategy align with the current trend we're seeing in telco APIs?
Well, I mean, platforms are only useful when they can be controlled. So, the whole sort of API conversation isn't as it's been in the past. APIs have always been about, well, actually, how can we add additional value? Usually in terms of operational sort of efficiency or the such like. And now APIs are now starting to become much more part of the non-negotiable stack that makes up what the telcos have to offer. So, telecoms APIs are going to become a thing. There is, I think there's a lot of work to do. I think there's a lot to learn from projects like, Kamara, organizations like Aduna, etc. In terms of, APIs are only going to be really, really useful when we can get the application developers on board to actually use them. And in order for that to actually happen, there has to be standardization. There needs to be ubiquity in terms of how they're actually implemented. So, no, there's not people that have to develop for one telco and then, have to develop again for another one. You can build something that then kind of works across all of the different providers.
Great, thanks very much, Fahim. And getting those application developers has always proved tricky in the past. Colin, I'm going to come back to you because you first raised APIs in an earlier answer. So how do you see it, APIs aligning with the platform approach?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but I just wanted to sort of double down on what Fahim was talking about. You pointed out skills and culture. It's a transformation for the whole of the business when you move to platform based thinking. Whether it be the product manager, it becomes an intensely uncomfortable conversation for product manager where you used to own a full stack and the box that was attached to it. It's like owning a home and then moving to a condominium. And you give up some of that control. You may be able to get things built faster, but at first it's a very uncomfortable cultural change. And for also at the product manager level, becoming API first, or how would you say, true API centric products requires a skills transformation to think about how do you instantiate every feature of your product in an API, whether you expose that to your internal users console, whether you expose that as an API to a wholesale partner, or whether you expose it to the portal or expose it to a customer, or expose the data in some sort of Kafka-based pub-sub data model, pump model. All of those are a different set of skill set as well as a cultural transformation. And below, you have architecture teams that are supposed to be looking horizontally, but you also have these things called what we used to call the old platform teams, not the new telco platforms, but the old, they would own a stack and an area. And that's where culturally, one of the big heavy liftings that we learned is that you've almost got Conway's law. And for those who are not familiar with Conway's law, is sort of you're doomed to have an architecture that reflects your organizational design, your org structure. So when you have multiple towers and multiple products collapsing onto one platform, you also get resistance, and you need cultural change and a lot of goodwill and leadership to have time to be able to move across. Otherwise, you get institutional resistance within the teams that run the old platforms. I was fine. I had one platform that just ran one communication service. It was great. And converging into one and getting people to understand that you're exposing APIs natively in the product itself when you develop it from the bottom up, rather than tacking it on as an afterthought, is one of the biggest challenges. But in terms of APIs, it's essential to think about that when you're building the product rather than as an afterthought, if you're going to be truly digital native when you go forward.
Thanks very much, Colin. And just to let our viewers know that in tomorrow's panel, we're going to go really deeper into APIs. But Warren, I'll come across to you because you'd like to add something on this point.
Yeah, just something quick that we've talked a lot about the software everything. I love that term. The power of going to microservices or software everything really is exposing what's inside those services, whether it be, as someone, I think Colin mentioned, whether it be to internal folks or to external developers. That really is when the power of a software stack is realized. And the spreadsheet comment was really germane to this discussion, I think. I agree that a lot of the operations behind the scenes here, we have a lot of spreadsheets. We have a lot of massively complicated scripts that do things that, frankly, should be done in a much more efficient way, utilizing these APIs through services. So really the first consumer to prove the use case to the telcos probably should be the internal teams that manage and optimize the internal parts of the networks for the telcos. And Wind River's helped a lot with the virtualization of 5G to exposing these interfaces to allow the telcos to better understand. I think Vivek mentioned the analytics part of it, better understand what's happening top to bottom, core to edge in the entire network, and using interfaces as opposed to complex scripts or spreadsheets to understand what's happening in the network and to optimize even internally. So sort of to be the first consumer, right? To eat your own dog food, to really believe that this is the right way to go. And as Colin said, it's a massive cultural shift internally for these folks who have been managing these networks the same way for 20 years to kind of understand there's a much better and more efficient way to do this. So that's a big part of what has to happen, to get the telcos really on board with this software everything API model.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. It must be a big shift for individuals and teams. Vivek, let's come across to you because you'd like to add something on this theme.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick on a couple of things. Firstly, obviously, platforms, like Fahim said, have no use if you don't have the APIs then to consume them in the way you want. And to pick that point on culture, I think that's something really important. A lot of these APIs have to be data driven in terms of what value they provide to the upper layers of the stack. And if you don't have the right kind of data, which is pretty much all the infrastructure that you have in this case in one place, then you're going to end up with silos and the APIs will not give you that kind of value. So if you think about services that which are location based or quality of service, billing, all these services and that you want to consume will not be effective if you do not have kind of the comprehensive clean data beneath it, which drives that and enables that. So the culture and the way the operating models are in companies, these become really important factors in how effective the platform and indeed the APIs that are being consumed are delivering for that particular company. And I think at the end of the day, intent-driven services, data-driven services, all these things are the way we want to play this, and they will help both in bottom line, like was mentioned earlier, and in the top line. But it's got to be based on kind of having all the kind of data from the infrastructure in a clean layer, and then APIs built on the top of that to drive that. And I think that's, to me, feels like a really effective place for us to consume the APIs.
Great. Thank you very much, Vivek. Thanks, everyone, for comments on that question. Well, we've heard a lot of positive things about the platform model and platform economics. But as we move further into the transformation of telcos, is the telco as a platform model the best bet for future success, or are there viable alternatives that perhaps we need to consider? This is a tricky one. Colin, if you don't mind, I'll come across to you first. But do you really see this as the best route to future success?
I would, in terms of that, but there's a couple of questions that still probably remain unresolved, or how would you say, for the industry, still work in progress, because many telcos today are not just volume-based providers, but they're also managed service providers. And I think the redefinition or the relationship as you move and collapse your portfolio into more of a communications platform, how do you reimagine what managed services on top of that looks like? Because before, underneath, it was very, very people intensive. You're going to more of a lights out, more automated model that has different routes to growth other than through traditional sales team and managed services. But at the same time, you also still have a very profitable, some of us, like BT, the business part, have very profitable managed services businesses with very important global customers who really have an important need, and we feel a great responsibility to not impact, while we're going through this transformation, not impact the operational resilience of our customers while we're sort of changing the engine on the jumbo jet while it's flying, when you're in a brownfield situation, but also the profit pockets, the profit pools of how do you then transform managed services sitting on top of this platform. It should be greater than the sum of the individual constituent parts rather than taking away from the managed services. And that requires almost as much innovation and thinking about how do you reimagine and how do you transform service, the visibility, how do you leverage the data that one of my colleagues on this call was talking about. Those are really great points and still work in progress, in all honesty, for every telco that I've seen so far. And is there a model that comes after this, or are there alternatives? I guess I don't know the answer to that. Maybe some of my colleagues might have some ideas, but I would say some telcos, if they haven't, like Colt or BT, who've already ripped the Band-Aid off 3 years ago and have been building like fury, it's incredibly hard in a brownfield to do that. Some telcos today that didn't make that decision a few years back, their boards may be looking at it now. They may have missed the window to make that investment, to make that hard decision, and may only have the option to milk their legacy platforms and manage them for cash rather than manage them for innovation. Because I just don't think putting a thin layer of digitalization on top of a really old tech deck stack will deliver the platformatization difference that our customers are going to need. Because I think I'll get I'll have to pay into the piggy bank now. I'm the first person to say AI. When AI starts to hit the network, it's not being launched into the network, it's escaping into the network. So you really need programmable everything in your network. You need an agile network to start to be AI ready, a network that is AI ready, because everybody talks about AI, but they don't talk about the network implications of AI. We've got to be ready for this. And if you haven't started building your platform, you're probably going to miss out.
Thank you, Colin. Very, very interesting views there. Food for thought, certainly food for thought. Warren, did you want to come in on this one about whether this approach is the best bet, or whether we should be cautious and consider other options?
Well, so is it the best approach? Not sure, right? I think it is the only approach that allows for other approaches, frankly. I know that's a strange thing to say, but building the platform as a service is almost a requirement for doing in any other way. What are your other options? You could become a vertical integrator of specific applications, or kind of follow the old model, as Colin mentioned. But in order to move forward in this space, telcos have to go down this route, right, of creating platforms as a service and to allow the infrastructure to be treated like software, right? So in order to do any of the things that you're talking about, I don't know what a better way to do this would be, but whatever I can think of as a different way to do this requires platform as a service first. So I think it's an absolute necessity to go down this route. And a few things Colin mentioned are really important to me. And one of them that I'm really passionate about is if we really want to create software everything, and Vivek had an advantage going into full greenfield, but kind of trying to transform some of these brownfield environments, you can't simply just take your existing non-cloud native applications, methodologies, and culture and kind of put a ball around it and try to shove it into software and say, oh, there we go, we're cloud native, right? You really have to think about how to do it intelligently as part of the architecture to really create a cloud native environment. Very difficult to do in a brownfield case. And I think BT's done a great job at getting there. I think some of the other telcos are a little further behind, but I'll put the second part in. As AI and frankly other intense edge workloads come into being, having this platform as a service in place is absolutely essential to take advantage of everything that we could possibly see happening at the far edge as the workloads migrate from the core to the edge onto things like software-defined vehicles and other use cases beyond kind of the telco core, right? The telco edge. So building platform as a service will enable all of those things to happen. If we don't have platform as a service, frankly, a lot of the benefits that we've been talking about in 5G and 6G or next G just can't happen. I think that's been one of the big disappointments of 5G is not enough folks have embraced this software everything model, so we haven't been able to take advantage of the true promise of what we all expected 5G to be.
Great. Thanks very much, Warren. So we're getting some great insights and views in this discussion. I'm going to come to my other two guests now. Fahim, I'll come across to you. What are your thoughts on this?
We have to look at kind of the customer base. I mean, I think Warren is 100% right. We all have to have platforms at the core of our businesses. It's the only way that we could, efficiently manage our businesses and basically make sure that we can offer a wide sort of portfolio of services that we need to offer. But on the other side, in terms of the customer-facing element to it, I think the platform is really important for some. That granular level of control, that programmability, the way that you can basically, provide or support new use cases that you cannot support today. I think that's absolutely critical for a certain segment of our customer base. Whereas, as Colin said, we still have managed services customers, and those guys, they don't build, they buy. They're interested in getting an outcome delivered. So for those, the platform from an internal point of view becomes very, 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 very important. But in terms of the experience that they got, it still very much remains very similar to what they're actually getting today. It's just how do we do that better? How do we do that in a much more efficient way? And how do we make sure that we maintain some level of profitability as we actually do that? And then I still think that there is a kind of a third customer base, which is really simple customers. There are going to be customers out there that they're interested in getting an internet connection. They don't want that componentization. They don't want that composability of multiple different services. They just need connectivity that works. And I think that business is going to continue to exist. But I mean, like Warren was saying all along, this is effectively in the core of the telco is the platform. The question is who's using it. Is it the customers that are using it directly? Is it being used by other internal staff that basically develop out capabilities and product offerings, etc., that they can then take to market on for the right customer base? So yeah, I mean that's the way I say it.
Great, thank you very much, Fahim. And Vivek, we'll come across to you because you want to come in with this on this question as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, like Fahim said, right? Core connectivity is a fundamental service that telcos will provide. And I think that will continue to stay. Although I think what Warren said was interesting, right? If there are other alternate models that we don't know of, we would anyway have to do what we are talking about here, which is make the stacks programmable and software centric. And who knows, right? With AI and generative AI, agentic AI, we are seeing a very, very fast moving technology world, and there could be some alternative model that telcos will hit upon, but which you don't know of today. But to get, to be able to exploit that, I have no doubt, and I think that's what people are saying here, is you will have to make your stacks, your networks more software centric, more platform oriented with APIs coming out. And who knows after that what we stumble upon in terms of our winning alternate model.
Great. Thanks very much, Vivek. And choosing a model is always a strategic risk, which brings us nicely to our very last question. We've just about got time for a quick final question here. And I'd like to ask about the risks associated with a platform-based approach and what telcos perhaps need to mitigate against rather. And Vivek, you mentioned, we don't quite know what the best model might be, but we've got to do this. So can I start with you and kind of come to you for your thoughts about what are the risks might telcos have to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, when you have very software centric kind of a stack, with a platform kind of a thing, obviously things like security and things like that, and then data sovereignty, those are the obvious things, but I think they can be managed and controlled. And I have no doubt that brownfield telcos are fast learning this game, and they are in this for the long run, so they are going to be on top of it. The one risk, I suppose, with this kind of a disruption, what happens is you end up sometimes cannibalizing some of your existing revenue streams. When I go back to my old company, and Colin will know this well, there are lots of very profitable customers in the B2B and B2C space who are just on old technologies, old networks, and but you don't want to continue in that at some level because you have an aging workforce where you're losing those skills to run those networks. So you have to disrupt. But then the risk of that, of course, is that you're waking up these kind of highly profitable customers, and who will then wake up and say, oh, might as well look for alternate services. So that's been a very, very a fundamental sort of dilemma for brownfield telco companies, is at what pace do you want to modernize and your networks and go into that kind of platform centric world. It's been quite a dilemma, and but at some level it's the skills are going right to run those networks, so it's really a Hobson's choice. You have no choice but to kind of move to that modernized platform network world, software centric network world. So yeah, I mean it's a challenge, and that's a risk of potentially losing revenue when you're getting into this disruptive model and moving into a modernized kind of stack. But I think they have to do it. They might just choose to decide the pace at which they want to do it.
Thanks very much, Vivek. Who would be a telco, eh? And Fahim, let's come across to you for some final comments.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest issues one of the biggest risks is actually conservatism. So, it's, as Colin was saying, moving towards a platform type environment is an incredibly uncomfortable thing for a traditional telco to do. It goes against basically every measure of success that we've had in the past sort of decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, quite a long time. We have to, it's one of those things that you go all in or you don't do it all. Yeah, and that's the really that to me is the biggest risk, is that basically we go halfway, so you don't get any of the benefits of the new world and you lose all of the benefits of the old world as well. And that to me is kind of the biggest thing that we need to mitigate against. And ultimately it's about bringing in the right thinking into the organizations, and also providing organizational safety for those people that really want to really change things. I think that's super important.
Thank you, Fahim. Well said there. Well, we must leave it there for our discussion today, but I am convinced this debate will continue during our live Q&A show later. For now, thank you all for taking part. Now, if you are watching this on day one of our Telco as a Platform Summit, then please do send us your questions. We want to hear from you. We want to know what your questions are on this topic, and we'll answer as many of them as we can in our live Q&A show, which starts at 4 p.m. UK time. Full schedule of programs and speakers can be found on the TelecomTV website, and that's where you'll also find the Q&A form and, of course, our poll question. For now, though, thank you for watching and goodbye.